But when we've had the conversation with you, when we've made it really obvious what our pronouns are and what our name is and things like that, and you decide, oh no, it's just too hard for me, or oh, I would rather say this, da 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 da, you're effectively making it about you. Hey guys, it's Kat and it's time for another episode of True Tea. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me right here on this channel at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every single week on Tuesdays for True Tea. I appreciate those of you guys who are always in my comment section leaving thoughtful, long, juicy comments. We are working on making sure that the regulars who comment on this channel are being approved. So make sure that you do leave your comment. I'm gonna try to make it so that I'm not spending days upon days approving comments. So yeah, if you guys want to be part of the regular commenting crew, make sure you let me know that you're here, and you can do so by leaving a comment, always giving me your fresh brew of true tea. Anyway, we are going to be having a very interesting conversation in this video, so as per usual, I would highly suggest that you go to your kitchen and grab yourself some tea. Currently, I am drinking some peach green tea by Crystal Light. I'm turning into my mom. I recently discovered that you can buy like this little powder that you can put into like gallons upon gallons of water and make a bunch of tea. And honestly, I'm starting to understand why my mom would always say that we have drinks at home whenever I would ask for a drink from McDonald's, because after I discovered powdered tea, it's like, honestly, like, why would I ever buy a tea ever again, So anyway, let me drink this and let's get into this video. And I will be sipping this quite a bit in this video because it is hot. It's very, very hot. And I'm trying not to turn on the fan. So y'all are just gonna have to bear with me this week. So yeah, anyway, let me drink this. So, as some of you guys know, because you were there, I just recently got back from VidCon. VidCon was really, really fun. I believe this is about my 4th year, maybe my 3rd year. I don't really know time or count, but I really enjoyed it. It was pretty low key in comparison to other years for me. And, I had a lot of really fun moments, but there were a couple of things that happened while we were at VidCon. And one of the biggest things that I heard of was that a fellow trans person, Myles McKenna, was misgendered on a panel that he was on about LGBT activism. And I kind of wanted to make a video talking about misgendering and kind of really unpacking that for those of you guys who may be curious, or maybe you don't understand why trans people would have the reaction that a lot of them do to being misgendered. So let's get into it. So for those of you guys who do not know about the situation, I will link a video by a user, I believe, whose name is Hard Left on YouTube, a trans masked person who kind of did a really great video about the situation. I'm gonna be really summarizing it, but here it goes. Myles McKenna was on a panel, and this person named Stevie, who I will be honest, I'm not very familiar with, was hosting the panel. And when she was introducing Myles, referenced him as female and also slipped up and used she, and also used what we call in the trans community his dead name, right? The dead name is the name that a lot of people might have known you by before your transition, and it is something that for a lot of trans people is very painful to hear. And a lot of the anger around this comes from the fact that this was an LGBT panel at VidCon in front of a bunch of people, maybe not thousands, lots and lots of people. And this was a slip up that I think to a lot of people was too obvious to not have happened. Like, one of the things that Stevie said after being corrected was that she just didn't know. Now, to me, that's just unacceptable. It is just not acceptable to be a person who is moderating a panel about LGBT issues and not understand that you can't call somebody by their dead name, regardless of how well you might have known them or the relationship that you have with them. Part of the issue in quotations was that Myles has known Stevie for a bit, and Stevie, I'm assuming, has known Myles before he transitioned. And so some of that was in referencing maybe a person that she used to know, a person that, she used to see Myles as. And I really wanted to unpack some of that stuff and really kind of tell you guys my own stories about misgendering, because it is something that I think people don't quite always understand. And I think that, you know, some people might have been there or might have heard the panel and not quite understood why people had the reaction that they did. Because, you know, one of the things that I've said and some other people have said is that it feels deliberate, even though I, for a record, understand that it wasn't. I understand that Stevie has apologized and that Stevie didn't mean it. There was no ill intent. It was not vicious. It wasn't like she went out of her way to go and misgender somebody, but it feels deliberate. And I kind of wanted to talk about why that is, right? So again, as you guys know, I am a trans woman and I transitioned quite a bit ago. I transitioned when I was 16 years old, but a lot of my growing pains took place when I was in college. Now I'm 28 years old now. I graduated college when I was 21, and I've told this story before, but you know, going away to college, it really helped me sort of understand who I was. You know, when you are in an entirely new environment, you are now suddenly under no obligation to be the person who you said you were the day before. And being in a new environment, you know, I entered it with a very genderqueer, you know, identity. But being in the environment that I was in, a new environment where I could redefine myself, I kind of started to understand that, at least for me, I was sort of doing this thing where I was holding on to this version that people have become used to me being, while also trying to be myself. And that was what was behind a lot of my personal identity as a genderqueer person. And so through my years in college, I kind of had this sort of journey of having to fiercely redefine myself. And there were people that had known me before college who, you know, had issues with calling me by the right name. And what happened for me was when people started to not get my gender right, when they were misgendering me, calling me by my old name, what happened for me is I slowly but surely made it so that the people who were doing that were no longer part of my life. So I phased out a lot of people. There were a lot of people who I was friends with, who I no longer was friends with, because they were not keeping up with who I was, right? And there was a really awkward moment because while I distanced myself, you know, of course I had started transitioning a little bit more visibly, you know, throughout the years. And with that came passing. And by my junior year, I was in this very confusing space where there were some people who only ever knew me as Kit or Kitty, which is what I used to go by back then. And there were some people who knew me as, you know, the person I'd introduced myself as my freshman year. And so then I would go into classrooms, and we had one particular animation teacher, and I did not like this teacher, but we will not get into that in this video. And he, upon meeting me, right, saw the woman that I was and was just, without even thinking, referring to me with she, her pronouns, right? Because it was just sort of, I didn't even think he initially knew that I was trans. It was just like, oh, that's a girl. But my classmates, because I guess they hadn't had time to really sit with it, whenever he would call me she, whenever they'd call me her, they would laugh, right? And that was really painful for me because I had, again, been distancing myself away from a lot of these people who weren't willing to keep up with, you know, the name and the gender and all the stuff. And now I'm forced to be in class with them. Here's a teacher who's properly gendering me, and you're laughing at it, right? They're laughing at it. And it was really painful for me to kind of be in the situation because I'm forced to be in this class. And the reason why it made me uncomfortable is because, you know, in previous classroom situations I'd been in, you know, it was fairly common for me to be either misgendered or dead named, right? Back then when I was going through a lot of this stuff, my paperwork was not legally changed. And in a lot of classrooms, we did roll call, which I don't know did you do roll call in college? Because we did. And every time I talk about it, I feel like people don't do that in college, but we did roll call in college. And I always, you know, initially when I first started, you know, transitioning and things, I would just kind of go in and assume that I would have to pull the teacher aside at the end of class, right? But then sometimes when people would call my dead name and I wouldn't raise my hand, I would be marked tardy, right? And so I kind of began to get into this habit of emailing my teachers ahead of time to let them know what my name was, and this is my name, so that like I don't have to have that weird conversation, right? But there were so many times in school where the teachers reading off the list and they say my dead name. And I understand that to a lot of people outside of the community, you know, a teacher calling me by the name that I am legally, that's not very shocking or upsetting. You know, you wouldn't get why that would be bothersome, right? But it's bothersome because at least for me in my situation, when someone calls me a name that is totally obviously not representative of who I am, I then have to explain it. So while everyone else gets to raise their hand and, you know, oh, Cindy, da-da-da-da, Alex, da-da-da-da, and everyone's just raising their hands and no big deal, it suddenly now becomes a conversation. And that conversation is almost always me justifying and defending my gender. And when you're in an education space, you don't want to have to do that. You want to be able to focus on the lesson plan at hand. But what happens when you hear those words is now suddenly you're distracted. Now suddenly you can't focus on what's being discussed because all you could think about is being misgendered. Now, I'm obviously at a very different place in life. You know, I transitioned quite a bit ago, and so to be honest, I don't really get misgendered these days. But I wanted to sort of reference what misgendering feels like for those of you guys who don't know. You know, misgendering, when you're in that situation, it feels like the feeling I've always described it as is it's like a knife hitting the back of your neck. It's like a knife just picking at the nape of your neck. Being misgendered, you get the impulse to defend yourself. You get the impulses to actually know, but then you know that sometimes when you stand up for yourself, you get yelled at. Your identity gets dismissed. And so for many people, it's a lot easier just to sort of sit there and take it. So every little bit of misgendering, dead naming, things like that, it feels like a knife at the back of your neck that you just can't do anything about, right? And again, it's upsetting because it just puts you in that situation, right? Now, one of the reasons why I would get upset with some of my classmates, right? This is relevant to the Myles situation, is that, you know, I would tell them, hey, this is my name. Hey, these are my pronouns. And I would make it very clear that this is who I am, what the situation is, da-da-da-da. Now, there were some people who had different responses and reactions to that. Some people heard me say, you know, this is my name, and they're like, okay, no big deal, right? There were other people who they genuinely couldn't, like I would say the name and they'd be like, oh, that's just too complicated. Let me call you this. And this was always like, in their opinion, like a feminized version of my dead name or a combination of two names, right? I had this one classmate who I actually really, really liked, who she genuinely could not call me by the name I told her to call me. She had to call me a combination of the two names because it made her feel more comfortable, because it made more sense to her to call me this thing. When you're misgendered, it's effectively communicated to you that the person doing it does not respect who you are, does not see who you are. And again, most trans people do understand that there's going to be a learning curve. Most trans people do understand that not everyone's going to get it. Most trans people do get that when you come out and you express yourself as who you are, initially a lot of people are going to mess up. But to me, Myles McKenna, I've only ever known Myles McKenna. I don't even know the person they refer to on the panel. So for me, it's just, it stinks. Now, the reason why in the Myles situation, it felt deliberate, okay, let me explain this. The reason why it felt deliberate, even if it wasn't, was because Myles is somebody who has clearly gone out of their way to rebrand themselves as Myles McKenna, right? Has clearly, very clearly published and made a really big deal actually about how he is a man, his pronouns are he and him, and his name is Myles, right? This is someone who has made it all quite clear who he is, right? And obviously most trans people understand that when you first have a conversation with someone and it's like, hey, these are my pronouns, this is my name, you're not always gonna immediately get it. There's gonna be slip-ups, there's gonna be mistakes. And what a lot of people don't get is that for a lot of us, we understand those mistakes are gonna happen. We're not going to flip out on you because you misgendered us, right? Especially if you're someone that we personally know, right? But when we've had the conversation with you, when we've made it really obvious what our pronouns are and what our name is and things like that, and you decide, oh no, it's just too hard for me, or oh, I would rather say this, da-da-da-da, you're effectively making it about you, right? Ignorance is something that we can all probably accept. You know, trans people, we live in this society that, you know, does not understand us, is not built for us. So many of us, we spend so much time working to fight against things like the paperwork that was, you know, that decided who we were before we had consciousness, right? We're fighting these things. And so we understand that ignorance exists and that people won't always get it and that not everyone's going to be on our side. But on an LGBT panel where you see Myles' name clear as day right there, you're familiar with him personally, you've seen him change his stuff personally. With all that out there, you actually going and using the wrong name, it feels deliberate. It feels like, well, you know, clearly this is how this person feels, but I'm gonna say this. And unfortunately, what is kind of beneath a lot of the reaction that some people had to misgendering of like, oh my gosh, you know, you're making a big deal about it. It's kind of this sort of thing where cis people often feel as though, yeah, you know, cis people unfortunately are in a situation where regardless of how I may feel about it, they get to define who transgender people are, you know. For Stevie to sort of look at Myles and see everything and still have the dead name on the back of her tongue, it feels as though you're having this sort of internal conversation where, you know, maybe he feels like this, but I'm gonna say this and I know him as this. And that's where the issue is. And, you know, being a trans person who is read as cis, you know, honestly, I've had a lot of pretty weird experiences where as a trans person, I will be standing there in a conversation with a cis person. A trans person walks across from them, or they're referencing a trans person in the conversation, and they tell me about how, you know, this person who wants to be called this, but I say this because it's how I know them. They tell me these stories about how, you know, I have a friend and they transition and, oh, I mean, he or she, da-da-da-da, well, but actually I've known him as, you know, they give all these excuses as to why they don't quite affirm the person's gender when they're out of earshot. You know, there's always some sort of excuse that always kind of relates to, well, I've known them as this. And it's a lot, and so often the trans person is only sort of fed, you know, this song and dance when they're in earshot, you know? So I know as a trans person who's read as cis, who's been in a lot of these weird conversations where trans people are spoken about in a weird objective way, I know that there are a lot of cis people who think, oh, okay, you know, yeah, I'll call you that name, but then they still, when they go and have private conversations, still reference, you know, the person as their dead name. I could be overanalyzing it, but it has to feel like, to some people, Myles, you know, and his gender and his gender presentation and all the things he's gone through, you know, that he's documented so in depth. You know, Myles does a lot of great work that's all about sort of helping other trans people. It feels like when people do things like this, make mistakes like this, that somewhere in their mind they believe that it's all a performance. It's all an outfit that's been put on. It's not actually who he is, but it's who they will outwardly and openly say they are. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of cis people, that's how they handle trans people is, you know, I'm going to say this, I'm going to be accepting of that, I'm going to pantomime tolerance, but I'm not actually going to see you this way. That's why a lot of people use identify as, they use preferred pronoun, this type of language. It's not that you actually are a man. It's not that you actually, you know, are a person who is their gender. It's that that's how you see yourself. And so if you want, you know, so if you want to see that and you prefer to be referred to this way, that's what it is. Now, that all being said, just because you're in the acronym doesn't mean you get it. You know, I, again, do not believe that Stevie did anything purposely, had any cruel intentions. I don't think that at all. I think that Stevie, you know, she had a moment of ignorance, and unfortunately it was a moment of ignorance in front of a lot of people in a context that could have hurt someone else. For me, this was like something that should have been done way ahead of time. And I will be honest and say, and this is kind of a little bit of a frustration that I have, I kind of hate that this happened because I moderated one panel at VidCon, and I think it was like one of maybe 4 LGBT themed you know, panels at VidCon. I made it very clear that I was open and available for other panel moderation. You know, honestly, a lot of me being at VidCon is I want to be able to help. To my knowledge, I'm the only Black trans girl at VidCon. I cannot think of another Black transgender YouTuber who's even invited, who's even on panels. You know, when I hosted my panel, it was me and like 4 for white people. Like I see it as like, I'm there to help. I'm there to help. And for me, this was such an oversight that I wonder why she was the person to host the panel, why Trevor Project never got in contact with me. These people know who I am, you know. It's not like I'm completely unknown, but it's whatever. So part of my frustration with this was a little bit of like, I hate that this happened because to me, this was such an obvious thing. And from my understanding, Stevie was very excited to host the panel, was very excited about the panel. And I think that is awesome, amazing, beautiful, and great. But something like not misgendering a trans person is ABC 123 baby's first panel. You know what I mean? And it's very sort of disappointing to me that it even happened. It's very disappointing to me that it even happened. And I'm not saying that to say like, oh my gosh, like I need to be the person, give me all the attention or whatever. I'm genuinely saying this at a place of care and love for, honestly, the trans creators who were at VidCon who had to be in the audience for that. Because here was part of my thing too. When someone on a stage like Stevie goes and misgenders a trans panelist, right? That hurt Myles personally, but it also hurt the people in the audience, right? And it communicated in so many ways that, you know, their genders, their who they are is up for debate, is not quite real, needs to have a, you know, the discussion. And I know that Myles in that situation, I'm sure the moment he heard dead name, she, female, I know that the reaction to that had to have been, because often when we're in these situations, we don't want to make a big deal about it. We do not want to draw attention to it. We don't want to be the whiner, the complainer, the whatever. We don't want to be the person who is making something a thing, right? Unfortunately, it put him in a situation where now he had to go and defend himself on a panel that theoretically should have been not have gone that way. Do you know what I mean? And it is really, it's annoying to me. Like, look, I'm obviously a Black trans activist. I don't understand like why I wasn't the moderator of this panel. I don't get it personally. I mean, I have a few theories, but we won't get into them. But either way, if it's not me, I wish they had someone who got it, you know, because there's a difference between being really passionate and wanting to do something and then what's best, you know, what's best practices. You could have had people who, you know, because to me, again, something like misgendering a panelist, so simple not to do. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to make that video. I just wanted to talk about this because, you know, for me, I think a lot of people just don't understand misgendering as a concept and like what it actually feels like. I'm really curious to know, for the trans people who are in the audience right now, I would love for you to share your own personal feelings about being misgendered. You know, for me personally, I know that if anyone misgenders me these days, which again doesn't happen, the only people who misgender me are haters. Honestly, I'm not just saying, oh my God, but like, you know, there was a time in my life where people misgendered me and it was a mistake. Now I know when people misgender me, it's usually them just being an asshole. You know what I mean? It's just them straight up being a jerk, right? And it's hard for me to be offended about something that's not true. I'm not a man, I'm not a he, so, you know, it's hard for me to be offended by that. Anyway, I'd love to know how you guys feel about this. I would love your brew of true tea. If you guys enjoyed this video, here are 2 other videos that you can watch. You can continue to sip true tea and leave your brew in the comment box below. In the corner, there are ways that you can send me a tip if you enjoyed this video, got something out of it, and just want to make me smile, maybe buy me some tea. So yeah, I will see you guys next week and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.